Have you ever been driving on a hot day and seen that shimmering pool of water on the road ahead, only for it to disappear as you get closer? Or maybe you've heard stories of entire cities floating in the sky. That's a mirage, right? It's one of those amazing natural phenomena that really blurs the line between what's real and what's an illusion. Today, we're going to deconstruct what a mirage is, and then explore a theory that challenges everything we think we know.
You know, this is how people have described mirages for centuries. And the source material we're digging into today? It takes this idea of a fairyland very, very literally. It suggests that maybe these visions aren't just tricks of the light, but something else entirely.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the conventional science behind mirages, what the textbooks tell us. Then we'll dive into some pretty tough questions that our source raises. From there, we'll explore a wild alternative theory, one that involves other dimensions. We'll even look at some bizarre stories of lost time, and wrap it all up with a totally new way of looking at these strange apparitions.
All right, let's jump right in. The big question is a mirage just a simple atmospheric quirk, or could we actually be getting a peek into a real-life fairyland?
To even begin to answer that, we have to understand the official story first. So, what does physics actually say is happening when we see these phantom images?
So here's the classic definition. It's all about light. A mirage isn't some hallucination you're having, it's a real optical event. The atmosphere itself is literally bending light rays and playing tricks on your eyes.
And here's the step-by-step. Just imagine the air is made up of all these invisible layers. On a really hot day, the air right above the ground is way hotter and less dense than the cooler air above it. So light from something far away, like the sky, travels down, hits that boundary between the hot and cool air, and then bends, or refracts, back up towards your eye. Now your brain is hardwired to think light only travels in a straight line, so it traces that bent ray back and says, hey, there must be a patch of sky on the ground. And that's your water on the road mirage. Simple, right?
Well, maybe not so simple. Our source author argues that while that scientific explanation sounds perfectly reasonable, it leaves some really specific, really tricky questions unanswered. And this is where our explainer takes a very sharp turn.
Here is the first huge problem. Science tells us a mirage is just a displaced image of a real, distant object. The author asks a pretty simple question. For all the hundreds of mirages of cities, mountains, and ships that have been recorded in history, has anyone ever actually found the real physical place they were reflecting? And then there's this. The physics of light refraction can easily make an image appear upside down. I mean, that's pretty common. So why is it that these grand, complex visions of entire cities or landscapes are almost always seen as being upright? The physics seems a little inconsistent there.
This one really makes you think. The basic conditions for a mirage, different layers of air temperature, happen all the time, everywhere on the planet. So if that's all it takes to create one, why is a true, complex mirage such an incredibly rare event? Why aren't we seeing them constantly?
And the questions just keep piling up. Why do some deserts, which you think would be perfect mirage factories, almost never have them? How do you explain a massive mirage showing up in the dead of winter? Some people say clean air is a factor, but if that's true, why weren't they way more common before the Industrial Revolution? And maybe the biggest one, if a location's geography is creating the illusion, why does the image it produces change every single time?
Okay, so with all those unanswered questions hanging in the air, the source proposes a completely radical alternative. What if a mirage isn't a reflection of something here on Earth at all? What if it's actually a window? The theory goes like this. A mirage is a genuine but very brief glimpse into another reality, a higher dimension that the author calls the Elysium world. So it's not an image of something on Earth. It's the real scenery of another place, somehow breaking through into our world for just a moment.
Now, you're probably asking, how could that possibly work? Well, the author introduces this idea of two different kinds of time. We live in what's called longitudinal time. That's the linear, one thing after another timeline we all experience. But there's also latitudinal time, which is the time of a non-material world. According to this theory, a mirage is what happens when our reality and that other reality briefly intersect.
Okay, so the obvious question is, if this other world is right here, all around us, why can't we all see it? The author's answer isn't scientific, it's spiritual. The idea is that our perception is limited because, as a whole, humanity just hasn't reached the required standard of merits and virtues needed to see into that reality.
To back up this pretty wild idea of intersecting timelines, the author points to several strange stories.
Now, these aren't about mirages directly, but they are about these unexplained moments where our normal, linear time seems to have, well, glitched.
Let's start with this number. 20 minutes. So there's a story from 1994 about an Italian passenger plane, 315 people on board, that completely vanished from radar. When it finally reappeared and landed, the crew was totally confused. For them, it was just a normal flight. But every single clock on that plane, including all the passengers' watches, was exactly 20 minutes slow. Where did that time go?
And then you have this ancient fable. A woodcutter wanders into a part of the forest he knows well, but he gets lost. He sees two old men playing chess and decides to watch for what feels like just a few minutes. He looks up, the men are gone, and he realizes he's seen the seasons change on the trees all around him. He finally finds his way back to his village only to discover that hundreds of years have passed. For the author, this isn't just a fairy tale. It's a perfect example of someone accidentally stepping out of our longitudinal time and into that other latitudinal time.
So what does all this add up to? Where are we going with this? Well, the author is really asking us to consider a completely new way of seeing these things. That instead of being a random optical illusion, maybe a mirage is actually an intentional message. In fact, the source argues that these visions are deliberate revelations. They're glimpses shown to humanity to suggest that this material world we live in isn't the only reality, that there's something more out there, something beautiful waiting for us.
And that brings us to the final, really provocative question at the heart of this whole thing. If mirages really are windows into another, more beautiful reality, what does that say about our own lives and our own potential? It kind of leaves you wondering, right?